Throughout my entire life, my grandma has taught me to help whoever needs and to be compassionate with others no matter what. When I was a kid, I tried to imitate my grandma's behavior in my own spaces, be it from sharing cookies or trying to stop someone crying with a song. At a really early age, I realized that my grandma didn't teach this value to just me, but also to my mom. I saw this when she decided to go to Venezuela on a medical mission, a period of 3 years where she would go with tens of thousands of Cuban doctors to deliver free medical care to those most vulnerable, leaving behind her 9 years old daughter. Before us, my grandpa, who I never had the chance to meet, fought in Sierra Maestra during the Cuban Revolution. The revolution of the people and for the good of all the people had triumphed, and my grandfather felt a little bit fear. It was around that time that he met my grandmother and they fell in love. She was the granddaughter of Spaniards and he was a mestizo man. In another time, it would have been unthinkable to see them together, walking hand in hand, sitting in a restaurant together. The end of racial segregation had arrived, but racism had not ended. How was this possible if so many of social justice policies implemented by the revolutionary government favored historically marginalized sectors? The answer is simple. Cuba, like many other colonized lands, was not able to totally detach itself from the legacy of slavery and colonialism that had freed the island for so many centuries. He really wanted a better future for his family, and this he accomplished. His daughter, my mother, was the first in the family to go to college, to become a surgeon, and she did it for free. It's difficult, nearly impossible to imagine that this accomplishment could have existed in Cuba before the revolution. But 2 generations later, society still judged his granddaughter by the color of her skin. Work harder, study harder, put in double the effort of your peers. When I was growing up, my mother repeated this message to me like a way society recognized us, not just because we are Black, but because we are women, she will say. In college, I discovered through anti-racist activism that Black communities had remained at the margins of the revolution and that there was still much work to be done. And we are still doing it, but the road is difficult and full of obstacles. At that time, the feeling of caring about others was transforming and becoming stronger. I was a Black woman growing up in a racist society, one with a lot of contradictions, one where I went to college for free and most people owned their homes, but where most of the people considered suspicious by the police are still Black. One where we all have access to public resources and free healthcare and subsidized food and transportation, but those who live in the least desirable areas, the ones most affected by the blockade and its impact on infrastructure, are Black. At the same time, Black people were among the first to have access to Cuban vaccines during the COVID-19 pandemic because the government prioritized more vulnerable communities. So you can imagine that I have the feeling that I had a lot of work to do. I never wanted to change the world. I just wanted to change the reality around me and the reality of people like me. That's when I started doing anti-racist activism, which led me to feminist activism, which led me to LGBTQ plus activism. During that time, I started to work for an independent media named Belly of the Peace. As a journalist, I discovered that the biggest of these obstacles is the blockade. the United States imposes on my country and the constant interference in materialize in hundreds of millions of dollars to finance democratic promotion, an euphemism that the White House used to speak of regime change. The blockade doesn't only affect the Cuban government, as US politicians often claim. It affects all Cubans, both inside and outside the island. But it affects some more than others depending on one's race, class, and gender. And unfortunately, as you can imagine, Black communities are impacted more than any other sector of Cuban society by US sanctions, which only intensified during the COVID-19 pandemic and afterward due to inflation. Everywhere you look, you can see the scarcity of food and medicine. For those that think that the crisis is product of a Cuban government mismanagement and have nothing to do with the blockade, I ask, how do you know? How can you separate one from the other if only 2 years after the triumph of the Cuban Revolution, the US imposed the blockade, which violated human rights and contributed to perpetuating a racist and patriarchal system? The US abolitionist Ruth Gilmore has identified racism as the state-sanctioned or Israel legal production Israel production and exploitation of group differentiating vulnerability to premature death. I consider the blockade a racist force because it stops the flow of goods and people, which is a matter of life and death for the people on a small island with a large Black population. US interference is so intense and has been going on for so many years that the Cuban government has come to operate with a permanent state of siege mentality. The small critiques or demands for activists fighting for a more just, inclusive country are rebuked or even attacked in the midst of the US war on Cuba. Government authorities have lost the ability to distinguish between legitimate demands and those fabricated by the Cuban American right wing and their US government benefactors. This is the same Cuban American right wing that opposes movement that fights for Black justice and liberation in the United States, enact laws against protests for social justice in Florida, give meritocratic advice to African Americans, and denies the existence of racial discrimination in the United States today. This is the same political force that uses image of Black Cubans being repressed by Black police officers to promote more sanctions against Cuba in the name of peace and democracy. Far from helping the Cuban people, as they suggest in their speeches, they are using Black Cubans as a tool to carry out their own interests, which end up doing even more damage to the communities they claim to defend. We have a lot of work to do, including eradicating colorism, classism, and dehumanizing language that even Black people use to demonstrate disagreement with their peers. I also hope we end the idea that standing up to denounce that racism exists is a kind of victimization of our community instead of a condemnation of a system racism. The blockade has not only taken away our capacity to dialogue without the threat of Cuban government intervention, it has also conditioned dialogue that I would like to have with US allies like you all and with others in Latin America. Although I have various critiques to make my own government, I would love to share the change and transformation we aspire to in our community and exchange our experience and run the risk of having my words used against Black Cuban community, and of serving as a trampoline for those who want to invade Cuba or advance regime change by other means. I'm not the only one. my friend Yurena collaborates with various projects that try to help Black families in vulnerable conditions, and it has been increasingly difficult for her to find fuel, medicine, and food, given their circumstances in which the country finds itself. Not to mention, it's almost impossible to have access to international events and collaborative projects given the sanctions against Cuba. But what does it mean for the United States to include Cuba on a list of countries that sponsor terrorism? What does it mean for Black Cubans? For my friend Alina, it means being locked up in Bogota airport for 36 hours before being able to continue her final destination to Europe. Because in addition to being a Black woman, she was coming from Cuba, a country considered a state sponsor of terrorism by the US government and its allies in Latin America. 3 years ago, when I started this journey, I understand that I would need to speak loudly because I was speaking against a whole imperialism system. Now, after having the opportunity to travel through the US and connect with people of all kinds of places, I realized that I'm not alone in this fight. Also, that there are too many people trying to raise their voices and organize on a large scale for those who cannot raise their voices. I think when you live in a country like Cuba, like DR, like any other country in Latin America that is under pressure of US foreign policy and imperialism, you are sold the American dream, is easy to forget how many people are excluded from that dream, especially Black people and Black communities. And that suffering is just in the US, is global. I don't have many privilege, but I'm gonna use this, stand for myself and for the other people like me.
Okay, great. So we're gonna go through a Q&A. We're gonna stick with the same pattern that we did earlier, which is to open the Q&A up, question and answers, to our online audience first. It is completely voluntary. So you can use the chat or you can raise your hand and we will ask you to speak. Once again, we are opening it up for Q&A for our Zoom online audience first. I'd actually like to kick it off, not because no one's saying anything, but because I have a burning question in my own heart. Hi, Liz. We met a few months ago at another talk of yours, and I'm going to put it in the chat as well. And it is, I want to choose my words carefully. I don't want to use the word favorite, but what is, in your opinion, what is the most successful internationalist mission from Cuba that supported Black people in any country directly?
Well, in my opinion, there's a lot of things that Cuba have been done for Black people around the world. I think that the first one, for me, that was the one that started everything, was when Cuba sent soldiers to support the fight against the apartheid in Africa. So we fought in Angola. My uncle fought in Angola, and my father too. So for me, that's the biggest one. That was the first one, and that was the excuse that U.S. government used, but put Cuba in the state sponsor of terrorism in the first place. That is something that is going to affect us, and it's really hypocritical and cynical because we left Cuba only with our parties and our memories. We don't leave Angola or Ghana or any other country when Cuban have been at that time with militaries or base or whatever. We just came back with the people, with our debts and the trauma and the bad memories, no? And the hope that we really are helping a country to become better. After that, I just can think about how many medical missions in Black countries Cuba have been doing during these whole years. I'm thinking about Haiti and the earthquake, and during that time, U.S. have been sending soldiers to do, I don't know, or Ebola in Africa when nobody's like doing nothing to help the Ebola pandemic in Africa. Cuba was one of the first country we sent with doctors there. So on. There is so many. It's like during my entire life, I've been taught about internationalism. I know that you talk about internationalism with something big or something, I don't know, it's something that you need to do a lot, put a lot of effort on it. But for us, it's just life. It's the way we think about. We are not okay if there is people that are not okay. So if they need us, we just willing to help. So we are willing to stand up for others. That's the way that we grow up in Cuba. So it's not, internationalism is not like a big thing for us. It's just the way that we need to act in order to have like a better world to live, to legal to our descendants.
Thank you so much, Liz, answering that question and giving more than one example. At this time, I'm going to request for any of our Zoom audiences to place their question in the chat. You may place your question to the chat. Don't direct chat one person. Try to send it to the all or everyone. And we're going to turn our Q&A towards the room. Looks like we have a, do I have a question here?
Yes.
Oh, we have a
Anybody else have
question.
in the room?
Let it soak in. And we have, I'll let you introduce you.
Sure. Hi, Liz. Thank you very much. I'm Nia. I was wondering, you said just now in this response, internationalism may seem like a big thing, but for us it's life. And you did say a little bit about that. So you did say if others are not okay, we're not okay. And you talked about solidarity, but I do wonder if you could just, if it makes sense, if you think it makes sense, elaborate on that just a little more when you talk just the notion of internationalism as a way of life.
Yeah, of course. If you have the opportunity to come to Cuba, to visit Cuba and to interact with people, you realize what we're talking about. I think it's a way to be compassionate and empathize with other people's suffering. For example, since I was born, I was telling about this U.S. government treat us badly to Cuba, make our life even more difficult. And even though if you're a U.S. citizen and you come to Cuba just to visit, you realize that people in Cuba are really friendly with the U.S. citizens or whatever. It's funny because when someone Black in the United States thinking about Cuba, they never imagine that there are so many Black Cuban Americans, like so many Black Cubans living in Cuba. Because I don't know why, maybe it's because the media that they have this idea that the most of the people in Cuba are white. That should be for the politicians, Marco Rubio, Fernandez, and all the Cuban Americans. But for example, we have a brigade. The name of the brigade, the doctors is Henry Reeve, because I was a U.S. soldier that helped that foreign Cuban revolution. So during the Katrina hurricane, that was one of the biggest catastrophe. that passed in United States, we create this brigade in order to help the Black communities, the people who were suffering because the hurricane. At that time, Clinton said, "No, we don't know. We don't need like Cuban help for that kind of stuff," and they say no, and they close the door to solidarity. In fact, because we are sending doctors, as we are used to do, but I don't know. I don't want to give so many credit to the Cuban government, but this is something that, for me, that came with the whole idea of the revolution and be free and liberation and sovereignty and everything. Because I think this was the beginning. I'm thinking about, I don't know, at the beginning of the revolution, the literacy in Cuba was really, really low. For example, my grandma just gone to the high school because she doesn't have time and she needs to start to work when she was 9 years old. So when the revolution came to the power, a lot of the literacy in Cuba was really low. People like parents send your young children out to different part of the country to teach like older people like how to read. It was something that everybody was willing to do and nobody was questioning, okay, why my child is going to help like travel alone to the whole country to teach someone else? Who cares? Well, we cares. That's the way we think. And for me, I think that I'm sometimes and this is something about my experience in the US. I experienced that when you help someone or you offer your help someone in the US, they always ask for, okay, what do you want from me? Why are you helping me? Why are you doing this for me? And for me, it's like, why not? If you need help, I'm gonna be there for you, because that's the way that we growing up, raised and being raised in Cuba. That's the way that nobody's questioning. For example, I'm talking about Katrina, but I can talk about the more recent hurricane that we have in Cuba that really affects to people in Pinar del Rio. Pinar del Rio is is from the east of Havana, the capital, and is one of the most poor provinces in Cuba. People have like the hurricane blow out their houses, and people was more worried about their neighbor houses than their own houses. I don't know how to explain that. It's like even when you're in bad conditions, you're able and you're willing to help others, like your neighbor. I'm talking about communities trying to raise again like houses of all the neighborhoods. For example, the communities sharing food because it's a blackout for weeks because the hurricane and they don't have the way to keep the food in good state. So they're going to prepare like a big meals for everybody to enjoy. It's like they're thinking in other people more than themselves. I remember, I don't know if that kind of help you. I grew up in a poor neighborhood. I was my mom is surgeon, but in Cuba, that's working class. That's the way it is. I remember I was a child, the entire neighborhood like paid for a bus for in the summer because okay, the children's on vacation, so we need to do something in order they enjoy the vacation the summer. So they rent a whole bus to take all the children in the neighborhood to take to the beach. So, and the food was really simple. Every neighbor was okay. I have rice, and the other have like I don't know, pasta or meat or vegetable or fruit, and everybody was putting something from themselves in order that the kids have lunch and food enough to enjoy the day of the beach in the beach. That's the way I was growing up. That's the way we raise children in Cuba. So that for me, it's a small and maybe just say it's a random example, but that's the way we grow up, knowing that the other part, the others are really important. That if they are not okay, we are not okay. If they are not happy, we are not happy, because we need to worry or to take care of each other. Because if we don't do that, who does it? Who does it? Who is going to get someone from, I don't know, the government or something like that? We need to take care of each other. That's the way we raise children in Cuba. That's why solidarity and my mom going to another country, left a 9 years old child behind, is easy. It's not easy in the way, of course, she's grieving in the time because she's losing a lot of stuff from her child, but it's easy for her to take the decision to go because she needs to take care of another children that doesn't have who doesn't have attention or health care or something like that. I don't know if I explain myself well. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry, I'm struggling.
Liz, we can hear you very well, and we actually have a follow-up question from Nia again.
Anybody
Nia?
else in the room have questions? Oh, we have someone in the room first that has a question.
Okay, so I'm gonna bring this to you. Just wait, Liz.
Yeah.
And you can give Liz your name and
Hi, I'm Malika, pronouns she, her, hers, and it's great hearing you talk about your experience in Cuba and outside of Cuba. And I'm just very curious about like your first experience in the US or like outside of Cuba and how, I don't know, what impact it had or how different it was than what you expected. I'm just curious about, your experience elsewhere and how that's helped you develop as a person, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you to you for the question. Well, I was really cynical about being in US. I think it's because my job, being a journalist, being an activist, is really depressing. It's not something that pleasant. I'm an activist, I'm anti-racist. It's really depressing because it takes a lot of time, work, and the things that you really accomplish are really small. And sometimes you want to do more, and it's impossible because something is beyond you. But being in US, well, the first thing is that I realized there are many USs inside US. It's not only countries, a lot of countries inside a country. That was really new. I wasn't expecting that. And I discovered that. And the other thing was that, okay, I came here to talk about my problems and the problem of the people in Cuba. I really experienced that Black communities in the US has so many problems that I feel bad bring in another one to share it with them. Because I don't know, it's because I don't know, I'm talking about my own experience. I don't know if I'm right. This is my perspective to be only like 2 months and a half in the US. But for me, it was so hard experience or seeing what the Black people in the US is suffering right now. What are the amount of work that they have to do in order to have like also knowledge that the smallest steps that have been accomplished in the whole year. Because, for example, I don't know if I can explain myself well, but for example, when we talk about Cuban government, it's easy to call the regime, this is dictatorship, or blah, 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 whatever. We can talk about that a lot. I have a lot of thoughts about that too. But for example, with because we are all of that because we only have like 2 presidents in 60 years. But in 60 years, with only 3 presidents until now, the Black people, the Black communities in Cuba have been accomplished so much in comparison with the United States Black communities, with so many white presidents too. That is crazy. So, of course, we have a lot of work to do, and there is a lot of things that go beyond us, like trying to stop the influence or the harm that the US policies can do in my own country. But bring this problem to all the problems that already exist in the US, I don't know, I feel bad. Because in US, there are so many people from around the world with so many problems on the same cause, US government. So people from Haiti, people from Colombia, people from Venezuela, people from DR, people from Philippines, people from, I don't know, I can talk. I have like a several experience. And all of them live in the US because they have to leave their countries. The most of them like it was growing up in the US, and they are trying to raise your voices for the people who are still living in their countries, and also because they don't like to live in the US, but they can't go back to their original countries because there is no country to come back for, because the situation is pretty bad. And even when they have to work a lot in order to survive in US, it's better option to come back to their original countries that they don't have nothing there. I don't know if I answered your question.
Absolutely. Liz, thank you. And I put 3 questions in the chat. The first one is from Athul. What were the key moments in your life that made you realize that you wanted to be an activist and journalist? After that, in the chat is a question from Liz, not you. And then finally, a follow-up from Nia. And it looks like if we have time, we'd love to dig into what Tego also put in the chat. But let's start with from Athul.
Okay, Atul. I didn't realize that I want to become an activist. I think that the activism finds me. I was in a personal experience trying to struggle with my hair and my Black heritage. I didn't feel comfortable that the way I have to wear my hair straight, and I was tired, and I find this amazing group of women that trying to reivindicate natural hair and the beauty of Black people, and I was just stuck with that. This is the you can start activism because okay, I want to be an activist, because at that time I wasn't sure about what is activism, or this is something that I want to do in my life. This is something that I arrived there since from a personal experience. I want to accept my Blackness as part of myself, of my beauty. I found this group of amazing women trying to do like a workshop with Black women about natural hair and the way to carry, and that's the way I get to the activism, anti-racist activism, because I realized that most of my struggles came from racist stereotypes that Black women, Black beauty is not beauty, that the only stereotype of beauty is this that came from whiteness, like be blonde, be tall, be skinned. So that's the way I started. And the journalist, well, I want to study philology. I don't know if it's in a kind of here in the college, you can go deeper. It's a kind of science, but it's just letters. For example, you can study Latin, all kind of language. So I wanted to do that. But in some point, my mom pushed me to try to apply for journalism. Here to study journalism is really difficult because it's just really small amount of spots, and you need to do like I don't know how to say that, but you need to apply for different tests, exams, like about language, about culture, knowledge that you have. They ask you about politics, historical events. So it's really tough, and the spots are really limited. And I went through all of that, and at the end they gave me journalism. I was so surprised. So I took it. And since the first day, I just fall in love of journalism and the way that journalism allows me to express myself and to stand out for me and for others.
Thank you so much.
Second
Liz.
question. Okay. Second question, let me see, so sorry. Okay. Organization, well, there is a lot of organization, and I have been this journey that allows me to be part of many of them.
Liz, can you hear us?
I'm talk about, yeah.
We just wanted to let you know that we actually have run out of time here in Boston.
Oh,
We
sorry.
have to, no, that is okay. Looks like people were taking their very intentional time. They have questions. What we should do is have these questions answered and turn it into something to follow up on this workshop. And I'm sure Ujima staff and members, we can work on that with you together, because some of these questions just got juicier in the last couple minutes. But for the sake of time, we will have to transition into closing out with you and then welcoming in Saskia here in Boston for the micro learning pod. So on behalf of Ujima and everybody that you can see here, can we all just give a round of applause?
Thank you, I feel honored.
We're going to bring you back, Liz.
Absolutely. So at this time, you heard the round of applause. We definitely want you back. I've taken the liberty of copying and pasting questions from all of our online audience so we can get that done. Other than that, we can say bye to Liz, and we're going to shift into micro learning pod.